Are you curious about the wines of Piedmont in northern Italy? What are the differences between Barolo and Barbaresco and their respective food pairings? And why do you need to try some of the spectacular sparkling wines of this region, especially those that are lesser known or underappreciated? Well, tonight you're going to get those tips and stories with our guest. If you're catching this video on the replay, please get into the comments and type the word replay. I want to hear from you. And of course, if you're here with me live, let us know. What's your city? What's in your glass? What's the weather like? I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online food and wine pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. I'm live streaming this video for the first time. It is based on a recording for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk, but I will be here live in the comments, and responding and commenting with you. So get in there. What questions do you still have? What tips and stories are you enjoying? Please let us know. Now, before I introduce our guest, let me say that two of you will win a copy of his terrific new book. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose two people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. David Way holds a doctorate degree in theology from Oxford University. He then pivoted. He did make some wine during his undergraduate days, so there is a transition. And now he specializes in the wines of Italy and is a senior researcher on the 5 textbooks for the WSET Level 4 diploma program. His new book, The Wines of Piedmont, or Piemonte, published as part of the Classic Library of Académie de Vin, gives an unparalleled coverage to one of Italy's most important regions and includes 200 producer profiles. For the first time ever, all 60 denominations or appellations of the region are covered in detail, and many of the native grape varieties. There's 60 to 80 of those. Additional chapters recount the history and current state of sparkling wine in the region, both tank method and traditional method. As a result, the book was honored by the International Organization of Vine and Wine this year at its awards ceremony in Lisbon. You can find David's articles on his website at www.winefriend.org. And David joins us now from his home in Hampshire, near London. Welcome. We're so glad to have you here with us, David.
Thank you very much, Natalie. What a lovely introduction. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this whole region.
Oh, we're keen to chat with you. We're going to dive in. Now, I did allude to this, but as an undergraduate at Oxford University, you made wine, I believe, from elderflowers and other fruit. What inspired that?
Partly poverty, I think, basically.
Good answer.
So there is a tradition in England of what we call country wines, which are made with all sorts of strange fruit and flowers. And actually, they can be quite interesting. And I learned, I don't really know. I had friends who were seriously into wine, but they obviously had more money than I did. And so, yeah, I just got into this. It was quite a common hobby in those days. And it proved to be really valuable because later when I became a serious wine student, actually having made wines of any sort is a huge advantage because you know what they're talking about.
Sure.
In a way, if it's just all theory, it's much more difficult to grasp. So and actually I only drank my very last bottle of my own wine about 15 years ago. So it was about 30 years old.
Wow! Did it stand up?
It was sort of port style.
Oh, I see.
So it was fortified.
Yes.
But it was made with elderberries. So yes, it had decent fruit. I mean, it's not going to stand up to any decent commercial example of port, but it was drinkable.
Well, that's an achievement in and of itself. Now, after graduating, how did your interest in wine grow, and especially in Italy? How did that happen?
So it was quite a long burn. I mean, for many years, like many English people who like wine, I bought French wines because that's what's pushed in this country. That's our tradition. So I used to buy inexpensive wines from the Rhone Valley, and I graduated a little bit to Burgundy in the days when it wasn't horrendously expensive. And then I started going on holiday in Italy, and learnt and then got really frustrated by not being able to speak the language. So I decided in midlife I would learn Italian, which was great fun and quite a
Wow.
challenge.
Yes.
And then, I mean, it's really weird because as I say, I went from Italian to Italian wine, not the other way around.
Oh,
So that, when I was a student, and I would go out in the summer for a couple of weeks, and I would do a top-up class in Italian, and there were often cultural things you could do as well. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up teaching small wine classes about the local wines of Tuscany, where I was based, and then on that, and after I'd done that for a couple of years, I thought if I'm going to do this regularly, I really ought to have a qualification. So I then started on the WSET qualifications ladder, simply because I was working in the educational field at the time. It was easy that the headquarters of WSET were only 10 minutes away on the tube. So that's how I came into it in a very curious route.
no, sounds terrific. Language, then food, then wine. It makes sense to me. So now tell us about, before we get into this first book, or the book that we're talking about, tell us about how your wife had the casting vote when it came to choosing which Italian region you were going to write about.
Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of background, first of all. As you've already kindly said, my main job has been with the WSET writing the diploma textbooks, which is the most amazing privilege and exciting project. It's a vast undertaking. We had 70 external experts giving us notes on regions from around the world. Wow. And then my colleague and I basically wrote it all in a uniform way and did the bits of research which filled in the bits which other people hadn't told us about. The only disadvantage of that was that, of course, I wrote about most of Europe in that, so I had to, spread my interest very wide. And I only had, as it turned out, 10 pages on Piemonte within the book, because you can't favor some region over another. You have to write equally about Tuscany, Campania, the Rhone Valley, the Mosel, wherever it was. So I got a little bit frustrated in the end because I couldn't. What I really wanted to do was to do a deep dive into one Italian region. So of course, when I decided to do that, the obvious question was, okay, David, which Italian region? And by that time, I had visited a lot of regions, and I had spent a lot of time in Tuscany, as many people do. It's a beautiful place, has amazing wines, has great food. So Janet and I sat down, and we actually literally drew up a short list, which went Tuscany, Piemonte, Campania with Basilicata. So the latter choice would be less familiar with people, but Campania has amazing white wines. And those two regions, Campania and Basilicata, share one of Italy's great black grape varieties, Aglianico, which makes very substantial tannic wines which can age forever. So that would have been the most niche choice of the three, and probably one I knew least about. Tuscany would have been the absolute obvious choice. I'd been there a lot. And, it would have been a huge amount about Sangiovese, a grape that I love very much. And then, of course, there was Piemonte, which I, of course, visited and had been really impressed with the wine quality, with the food, with many things. But I didn't have quite the same knowledge of Piemonte then as I did of Tuscany. But Janet said to me, I think, David, you need a new challenge. So why don't you go for Piemonte? So we decided to do that. And it was also partly practical, to be honest. And that is that it's very easy to reach from England. So in 2 hours, you can fly to Turin or to Milan or even to Genova and be in various different parts of Piemonte very easily. Whereas Tuscany, okay, Piemonte is a big region, but Tuscany is very rural. And I didn't, it was really down to really silly things like how long would it take to get there from an airport? How long would you spend driving around through Tuscany is not all vineyards. There are massive forests as well. Right.
Well, you have to be practical, especially if you're going to go dive into the research and spend so much time in the region. Yeah.
So exactly. So I took challenge. I thought Janet's challenge was absolutely a good one. And of course, let's be honest, Tuscany, Piemonte makes some of the world's greatest wines. So it wasn't exactly a hardship. choosing Piemonte.
Sure, sure. Well, I think she was right, and then you get all the cuisine to match. Um, so, tell us in a nutshell, like how this book is different, perhaps from other books, either about the region or about Italy. I'm not familiar with the canon on Italy, so how would you differentiate your book?
Yeah. So first of all, there are very few substantial books on Italian regions. It's really underwritten. So the series that I'm in, the Classic Wine Library, loads of books about France, books about whole countries, very few books about Italy. So that was point one, really.
Okay.
Point two is that what's different about it? So there's a lot of writing in the press about Barolo and Barbaresco, the two famous Nebbiolo denominations in what we can call the Langhe. So the Langhe is the area within which Barolo and Barbaresco fall. But nobody really writes about anywhere else. That's the problem, is that it's complete. Those two world-class wines overshadow the rest of the region massively. So nobody else had really written a book that goes into detail about all the other parts of Piemonte. And let me tell you, there are a lot of other parts. We just spent a lot of time traveling, a lot of time interviewing people in order to go short. So that's really the biggest single difference. And then I'm sure we'll come on to talk about grape varieties. The other thing is that it just has such an amazing wealth of local grape varieties that really don't occur anywhere else.
Right, yeah, some
so
60 to 80. It's amazing.
So that was really fascinating. Yeah.
And then the size of Piemonte, how does it compare to Tuscany geographically? Like, is it twice the size or?
Okay, so it's a large region, but a lot of it is either genuine mountains, i.e. too high. So the Alps are on both on the western side and the northern side. So they're just the proper Alps, obviously way too high for growing grapes. And then there is this huge bit in the middle, which is where the famous risotto rice is grown. So there's this huge flat land of the Po Valley. And so actually the vineyard areas, particularly the substantial ones, are actually surprisingly close together in southern Piemonte. There are important areas in the north as well of Piemonte, but they are really quite close together. So again, there would Tuscany, I don't know what the actual physical distance is. I know that Piemonte is bigger than Tuscany, but as I say, much of it is really not wineland at all.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did they end up with 60 denominations, or I guess that are those DOCs or appellations?
They are DOCs.
60.
DOC or DOC or DOCG. So either
And what does that stand? Denominazione. Your Italian is way better.
So denominazione di origine controllata. So controlled denomination of origin. So a defined place within which you can grow certain grape varieties with a particular style in mind. And then DOCG, the same, but with garantita at the end of it, supposedly a higher level denomination.
Okay.
So why did they end up with 60? That is a really good question. And I've done a couple of presentations to growers in the region since I published the book, which has been really interesting and a massive honor, of course. And I have said to them, this is an amazing region. You have fantastic wines, but you just have too many denominations. It's too complicated. And the ones that I've really taken issue with are ones which are basically overlapping denominations for the same grape variety. There are two major Barbera denominations which are basically the same region. I have asked every grower I have met about this. How on earth did this come about? And we're talking about the early 1970s now, so it is a long time ago. But my best guess, and that's all it is that it was political. So one of them reflects the interests of the province of Asti, and the other one is the province of Alessandria, which they're absolutely next door to each other. Weirdly, the two denominations cover both regions, both provinces. So I just say to them, this really does not help. No. Italian wine is complicated enough.
Yeah.
And they nod at me and they agree. But unfortunately, these things never get, they only ever get new denominations created, and they never undo any of the old ones.
They need one of those
So yeah,
merge functions
they do.
on an
They
Excel
do. Yeah.
spreadsheet. Is there any way, is it important for us to know, to understand, or try to even sort out these denominations if we want to understand Piemonte? Or, yes or no to that? And then is there any way of remembering
Yeah.
them?
Yeah. So I would be highly selective, basically.
Okay.
In that, so of course, Barolo and Barbaresco, both denominations that require wines to be made with 100% Nebbiolo grapes in defined areas which are very close to each other. So, that's very clear. People understand that concept. Some of the denominations do help you by putting the grape variety in the front of them. So Barbera d'Asti,
Right.
Barbera from the area of Asti.
Okay.
Perfect. That's really good.
That helps.
Some you just have to, if you like the wine, you just have to learn the name. So if you take a northern example, for example, there's a lovely area called informally Alto Piemonte, so Upper Piemonte, and there are, wait for it, 10 tiny denominations in a small area. And okay, people, one or two real wine geeks might have heard of Gattinara or Gemma before, but frankly, you just find the wine that you like and you drink that, and you don't worry too much about what it says on the bottle, because it's hopeless.
There must be some sort of shrugging emoji or something they should come up with. Is this why all these complicated, small, tiny little regions, is this why sometimes people compare Piemonte to Burgundy, France, and whereas they compare Tuscany to Bordeaux?
Yeah. So yeah, there is a sort of element of truth in that, and the biggest single reason, I think, is because Tuscany, of course, has small growers, but it also has large aristocratic estates, really substantial properties. So, a famous wine like Tignanello is made in the hundreds of thousands. It is one of Italy's great wines, but it is not made in. So, in that sense, it's like a grand Bordeaux chateau.
Right. Right.
So
like your Margaux or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas Piemonte, and particularly, we're really talking about Barolo and Barbaresco here, and that's fine. Barolo and Barbaresco is many small plots owned by many small growers. So in that sense, it's very like Burgundy. The other way it's very similar to Burgundy is that tiny differences of altitude, soil type, which way your vineyard faces, the wind direction, make noticeable differences in the final wine. And of course, that's just like Burgundy, isn't it? Where you can literally walk, 50 yards from one vineyard to another, and the wines made from those vineyards will taste different. So in that sense, it's terroir expressive in a very similar way to Burgundy. And then lastly, the other reason is that when they were really trying to raise the quality of Barolo and Barbaresco back in the 80s and 90s, very successfully, I have to say, they all went off to Burgundy and visited Burgundy and said, oh, we want to be like this. So there was a sort of natural affinity with, they're both single grape variety wines. They both, aging in wood is important to both of them. And as I've already said, the parcels of vineyard are tiny in both places, and therefore, there are some real, there are some big differences as well, which are worth knowing about, and that is that actually Barolo and Barbaresco, the terroir is far more complicated than it is in Burgundy.
How so?
And that's because basically in Burgundy, this is a massive simplification, and the Burgundians will have to forgive me for it. Basically, Burgundy is one lovely east-facing slope. Okay, so you've got very similar aspect, and you've got a relatively small range of altitude difference, rising from the lower land up to the top, and all that. Both of those factors make a big difference. Barolo and Barbaresco, particularly Barolo, is very, very different to that. You have vineyards facing southwest, you have vineyards facing east, you have vineyards facing full south. You have a range of altitude from about 150 meters up to 550 meters. really significant changes. And you have three soil types, basically fundamentally three soil types, significantly different soil types. So actually the whole that's partly why, if you love the complexity of Burgundy, you're going to love Barolo and Barbaresco, because it's the same but even more complicated.
Oh, yay!
And if you just like a region which can produce wines which are similar in style but have subtle differences between them, then you are going to be in vinous heaven in Barolo and Barbaresco, because they do that in spades.
Huh. Yeah. And the slopes, they're like, as you say, there's lots of slopes, even though the aspect differs. But is there also differences in shading because of the Alps or other facets than we would find in Burgundy?
Shading can be an issue. The Alps are too far away to shade this area, but because the slopes are really quite steep, you can get situations in which the bottom 1/3 of a vineyard area can end up in the shade in the early evening, whereas the top of the vineyard is still in the sun. Okay. So because they are the best exponent of this is an Italian guy called Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's done the most amazing map work of this area and has a fantastic interactive website where you can, like a drone, fly around Barolo. It's quite incredible. It's called Barolo 360. It's really worth, if you're into this stuff, it's really worth checking out.
We'll have to put a link in the show notes to that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And he demonstrates this factor very much, that you because of this sort of fishbone structure. So you have a big bone in the middle, as it were, and then all these little valleys going off it.
Okay.
One part of the vineyard can be shaded by the next ridge because it's so close. And then, of course, that makes a difference to when it ripens, the style of the wine, all those things. Yeah. Yeah.
Neat. So what makes Piemonte's signature grape, Nebbiolo, unique? You've mentioned it several times now. Does the name have anything to do with dark grape, Nebbiolo? I'm thinking Nero d'Avola is the black grape of Avola, so Nebbiolo?
Indeed. Okay. So Nebbiolo, the closest word to it is nebbia, which means fog, which is really interesting because it is it's a continental climate and it is very prone to fog. So is there a connection? Who knows? Scholars debate about the origin of the name. Why is it the world's greatest grape variety? That's what you were asking me, wasn't it?
That's where you're leading me. I think you have a bit of a bias here, David, but tell us.
Indeed. I think the magic of Nebbiolo is this extraordinary combination of aromatic complexity. It's a very aromatic grape variety, and amazing structure.
The tannins
and acidity.
Okay. So and the acidity.
And the tannins and acidity together give it this amazing. So Pinot, which I also love, and of course I'm joking about Nebbiolo. Pinot is an amazingly aromatic grape variety as well. And until you get to Grand Cru level, it's not. Of course, it has structure, but it doesn't have very overt structure. It has quite a gentle tannin structure, beautiful, and is silky and gorgeous in those sorts of way. Nebbiolo is not like that. It has, I think, an even greater aromatic array. You might like it, you might not like it. I'm just saying it just has this incredible aromatic array, but then it also has this incredible structure. And of course, that's partly what enables it to age for literally decades.
And the signature aromas, I know, it'd be hard to summarize, but is it violets and tar and what those kinds of things going on?
So why I make this crazy claim about this amazing aromatic array is that it goes from everything from floral, as you say, violets, rose, through various shades of red and dark fruit, depending on where you are and how ripe it was that year and all those things. So red cherry, red plum, black plum, all through that whole range. And then it has this very sort of earthy animal element to it, even in relatively young wines. and then if you wait 20 years, you'll get this amazing array of again of the classic, what we call in the trade the tertiary notes, so leather, coffee, all those things, but also the tar thing. That's where tar and roses. There's a very famous English book which was written 30 years ago, still worth reading, which was about Nebbiolo, called Tar and Roses. So that tarriness, and then also this amazing truffle-like aromas.
And we mean the wild fungi, not the chocolate, right?
We do mean the wild fungi. Good point.
Okay.
And that's very interesting because, of course, it is one of the capitals of the truffle industry.
Yes.
Alba is the world capital of the white truffle. So it's really bizarre that its greatest wine also ultimately has these remarkable truffles. So you can see everything from floral, fruity, mineral, animal, to the exoticism of truffle.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Quite a range. Yeah. I guess this is one time when that adage, what grows together goes together. They have some similar aromatic profiles between the truffle accented dishes and the wine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, too, that it's traditionally been viewed that, especially Barolo, made from Nebbiolo, is a tannic monster that you can't even drink for 10 years. Is that still true?
The short answer to that is no, it's not. It's still tannic, but it's not a tannic monster.
Okay.
So let's explore that for a moment. The reason why it was a tannic monster in the past is deeply, deeply practical. So, and this story has been told many times, but in the long distant past, people used to pick their Nebbiolo in November because that's the earliest it would ripen because times were so much cooler. They would make the wine, and then they would leave it on the skins and go out and do all the other things on the farm, because we weren't talking about specialized viticulture. We were talking about mixed farms in those days. And then they'd come back a couple of months later and think, oh yes, I made that wine, I really ought to rack it off with skins. And of course, if you do that for 2 months, you are going to extract everything and more that is in those grapes.
Wow.
So, and then the old joke was, you drank your dolcetto while you waited for your Nebbiolo to come around, and it could be 10 years.
Right, because dolcetto's a much lighter grape, right?
Dolcetto is a less tannic. It still does have tannins, but it's less tannic. Yeah.
Okay.
So that world has passed away. We now have superbly gifted and trained winemakers. We have much better viticulture, so people know how to ripen grapes much better. We have a much warmer climate, which is really significant in Nebbiolo's case, because, as I've already said, in the past it used to only ripen in about November, and of course you could have several weeks of rain by the time you got to that, and you could lose all your grapes. So it was really not a great combination, and therefore you probably only made decent wine in like one every 3 years or something of that sort. But now that just is no longer the case. The weather is a huge challenge in all sorts of other ways, but because it's so much warmer, the grapes will ripen absolutely regularly. We've only had 2 coolish vintages in the last 25 years.
Wow.
And
what time of year are they now harvesting? Has that moved up to?
It's moved into mid-October.
Mid-October.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's 3 weeks earlier, definitely. Yeah. The harvest has just finished. Basically a week or so ago.
Okay.
So, and then finally, people have learned how to work with the tannins in much subtler ways. And yes, extract them, because it is Nebbiolo, it's supposed to be tannic, that's the point. But there's a huge difference between having a lot of underripe tannins in a wine glass and a lot of fully ripe tannins. So the finesse of the tannins has really changed, particularly in a year like, last year I tasted the new vintage, which was 2020. And 2020 is what in the trade we call a restaurant vintage. In other words, a vintage you can drink early.
Okay.
So you don't have to wait for 10 years.
I like that.
It's a lighter vintage. It's lovely, aromatic and fruity. But the tannins are already, it was amazing. I was sort of a little bit anxious about going and tasting like 100 Nebbiolo wines in 3 mornings,
Yeah.
thinking, God, this is going to be all right, But actually, it was an absolute pleasure because the tannins were they're not soft when they're that young, but they are really refined. And with a few, just like 2-3 years in the bottle, they'll be perfect to drink. Yeah.
And ripe tannins, does that just mean tannin I always think of as a texture rather than a taste, although some people say dusty tannins, whatever. But so does that mean if they're ripe that they're rounder, just they're gliding over your palate more easily?
I mean, I tend to go in for fabric analogies. That they're Pinot Noir. The tannins can be silky, can't they?
Yes.
They're super fine and beautiful. Nebbiolo will always have more grip than that. So even the most mature wines are going to be more in the sort of satin, more slightly a bit more resistant still, but they should never be bitter. They should never be abrasive. They should be a significant part of the texture, as you say, of the wine, and because it carries it off somehow because it is such an intense wine in other ways. It's aromatically intense. It has high acidity. They are very wines of real substance, and the tannins are an important part of that.
Yeah, and I think you've mentioned in your book or elsewhere that, the extraction is gentle. So they're not just, well, obviously they're not doing it the old way, just let it sit on the skins for 2 months, but they're really just being very gentle and very precise, intentional about how they extract those tannins from the skins. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
And what qualities make Nebbiolo a great grape for warmer climates?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that it seems very resistant to heat.
Okay.
So Greg Jones, who's a sort of wine climatologist, he puts Nebbiolo right in the warmest category. So he thinks it does well in climates even more better than Grenache, which we think of as the classic, black grape variety for hot climates. It has a very long season, so it's able to withstand heat. I mean, the best comparison is with Barbera, which obviously is another Piedmontese grape variety. Barbera is a complete sugar factory. Okay, and you have to make sure that you pick it at the alcohol level that you want, because if you leave it another week in the vineyard, it'll put on like another whole percentage of alcohol.
So
you have to
it's
choose.
Really gobbling up the sun, which converts to sugar, and then that in turn converts to alcohol when you ferment.
It loves the heat, but it changes it straight into sugar. Okay, Nebbiolo also likes heat, but somehow it resists heat and it doesn't put on sugar in the later stages of the vintage of the year. In fact, it's really important for that aromatic complexity I was talking about that it does have a long time on the vine and is still on the vine in October, because the thing you really want is warm days and cold nights in that period.
Right, those changes.
Those changes, and that's really what gives you that amazing aromatic intensity for the very best vintages of Nebbiolo. So it's something to do with its ability to resist heat in the middle of the season, and then go on getting more interesting as the nighttime temperature drops. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It reminds me, it's something metabolic is going on there. It's almost like it's insulin resistant. It's not reacting to the sugars, or it's not creating the sugars in the first place. So then the ripening is happening in the more complex ways in the skins, those phenolics, those aromatic precursors. Yeah. So it's not, as you say, a sugar factory. I love that. So Barbera is the grape that makes Barbaresco. How would you differentiate the two wines?
So Barolo, Barbera goes into wines like Barbera d'Asti, Barbera del Monferrato, etc.
Okay.
Barbaresco is also made with Nebbiolo.
Oh, right. Thank you for correcting that. So how would you contrast then, say, Nebbiolo and Barbera?
Yeah. Okay. So Nebbiolo, first of all, it should always be pale in the glass. Okay.
Okay.
That touches on an interesting point we could come back to. So it's in that sense it's a little bit Pinot-esque in that it's always pale, and it very quickly goes garnet in color. So it doesn't keep its redness. If it's when it's young, of course it's red, ruby like any other grape variety, but it quickly goes off in towards that brown direction, garnet. Barbera is completely different in that regard. It has amazing color intensity, and it will keep it for 20 years. It's very, very, very resistant in terms of. So if you love a deep colored wine and you want something from Piemonte, then you want to drink Barbera. The other big difference is the structure. Well, I think Barbera is a high quality grape, which can make really good wine. There are two differences. It is more in that middle red cherry to plum thing. It does have some violet, of course. It has some violet, some floral notes. It doesn't have quite the aromatic array of Nebbiolo. Structurally it's completely different. Okay, structurally Barbera is high acid and low tannin, whereas Nebbiolo is high in both. Okay. So if you're playing the crazy, blind tasting game, and you get two wines from one region, and one is deeper in color, and one is acidic but not tannic, it's going to be Barbera, and the other one is going to be Nebbiolo.
Okay.
So those are the other big difference is that actually Barbera suits New French oak quite well. So it goes well with those vanilla and clove notes of sweet spice notes from French oak.
Okay.
Whereas Nebbiolo is overwhelmed. And Nebbiolo is a more delicate, aromatic creature, and it doesn't really show that incredible complexity if you put it into a lot of new oak. You end up with a perfectly good wine, but it could be a perfectly good wine from anywhere. It really stops being Nebbiolo. So yeah, there's a whole story behind that, but we'll see if we get to that one.
Sure. It's hard to keep those two contrasting notions about Nebbiolo in mind at the same time. It's delicate, and yet it can be, no longer the tannic monster, but tannic. And it's like, wow, how do you... but that's what makes it so interesting, is these contrasts. You've also said, what do you mean when we talk about Barolo being the wine of kings and the king of wines?
Okay, so this is a tag which has been attached to quite a few wines in history, actually. So Tokai in Hungary,
yes,
it's also called this. So it's a great bit of marketing, first of all. It's a great slogan, and that's fantastic. So in Nebbiolo's case, or Barolo's case, it's because it is associated with the House of Savoy, which was the ruling family in Piemonte up to the point of up till 1861. Which is when Italy became a unified country, and then after the war voted to become a republic. So there was a monarchy in place, the King of Savoy, Carlo Alberto, and there is a story of actually a French woman who married into a Piedmontese family, became a marchioness, and she wanted to persuade the King of Savoy to take this wine seriously and to pass it round. She was also a great marketeer. She understood that if the King of Savoy had these wines, then there might be an ability to sell it to other royal courtyards around Europe, which is what happened. So Juliette Colbert, a French noblewoman, supplied the King of Savoy with wines from an estate in Barolo, and he got really interested to the extent that he actually bought an estate in Barolo. He actually bought an estate in the village of Verduno. And another part of the family bought another one, which is now the Fontana Fredda estate in Barolo. So she very cleverly positioned her wine, the wine that she was batting for. Sorry, that's the English expression. The wine that she was promoting in the royal household in Turin, the capital of Piemonte, and then it got this tag of the wine of kings and the king of wines. And I've already explained to you why it's the king of wines.
Yes, true. Yes, of course, in a totally unbiased way. She sounds like she had the same chutzpah of Veuve Clicquot from Champagne, who got her champagnes into the Russian court to celebrate the birth of the Tsar. The royals set the fashion those days,
Yes.
before social media, so they were the key influencers.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, in terms of food pairings, we've touched a little bit on this. The truffle accented dish for Barolo
Yeah.
would be wonderful, but what other food pairings come to mind when you think of Barolo?
So it's surprisingly versatile, okay, is what I'd say. There needs to be some richness in the food, because obviously this is a big structured wine and high acidity, as we've already said. So, but interestingly, it goes from everything from sort of rich, cheesy fondue. There's a dish called fonduta, which actually comes from a neighboring region, but is much loved in Piemonte. And it goes really well with that. It goes really well with, they love rare beef in Piemonte. They have a type of cow called Fazona, a type of beef called Fazona, which they're very, very proud of. And it's often served as a antipasto. So it goes really well with that. With game, of course. And then, of course, with the big casserole meat dishes. So it's an interesting range because you can drink it with everything from, a pasta dish with truffle and egg on the one hand, through rich, cheesy fondues, through to these big, meaty dishes. So it's really interesting how it is really surprisingly versatile.
And what food pairings come to mind for Barbaresco?
So Barbarescos tend to be a little less. Barbaresco is slightly warmer and quite a lot drier than Barolo. So in wet years, Barbaresco can often be better. Like 2014, for example, was a wet year. And actually there was far more rain in Barolo than in Barbaresco. I mean, the regions are only like 20 miles apart. We're not talking about a long way.
Okay.
And the geology is quite similar. Most of the geology of Barbaresco is like the northern part or the northwestern part of Barolo. But it is warmer and therefore a little bit riper. The wines don't require quite the same long aging. They don't require as long in wood. They are released a year earlier, so it's a slightly more delicate wine, basically. So if you were going to pair it with something more delicate of that whole range of things that we talked about, then probably Barbaresco would be a good choice. Yeah.
And I assume that, well, with the exception of, say, a restaurant vintage like 2020 was for a Barolo, you would want to decant Barolo, and that again would depend on the vintage. But generally, if people are opening up a bottle, do you suggest like an hour, 2 hours, or just keep trying it and seeing if it's to your liking?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I am a member. There's a closed place. There's a what are they called? On Facebook there are groups of aficionados of a certain thing, aren't there? The Wines of the Rhone or whatever.
Private Facebook groups. Yep.
Thank you. And so there is one for Barolo and Barbaresco, and they spend ages debating and telling you, I opened this in the morning and I left it, or I decanted it half an hour before, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sort of thinking, I'm not sure how much difference all that makes, particularly just opening the bottle. Right. I really don't think.
I don't think that makes. If you're not putting it into another vessel, I don't think it makes a dot of difference.
Exactly.
Scientifically, at least.
Would I decant? I think aeration in the glass actually is okay. I think if you pour your wine into a glass, of course decant it if you want to. If you think there's a lot of sediment, of course decant it. That's really the reason for decanting that sort of wine. But I mean, weirdly, I tend to decant young, fruity wines more than I do older, more structured wines, because I think you just get better fruity expression that way. So I'm not a huge fan but I mean, by all means, do whatever works for you.
Yeah, to each his own. But especially if it's an elegant wine with sort of Pinot Noir-like delicacy in the aromas, you might be losing some of that in decanting. Who knows?
Certainly somebody like Karen O'Keefe, who's been studying this for a very long time, she says exactly that. She says, I never decant old Barolo.
Okay.
And if you notice that, if you go to Burgundy, you'll notice that the Burgundians don't decant their wines.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, there is a counter argument.
Always is. That's what keeps the debate going in these Facebook groups. What else would they talk
Absolutely.
about? Who knows?
Yeah, that's right.
You have a story about asking a man in a local bar in Barbaresco when you were there how to find albino
Yeah, Albino Rocca.
Rocca's
Yeah.
winery
Yeah.
back in the
So
day
this,
before Google Maps. Yes.
absolutely. And I was just I was a wine blogger then. I wasn't a professional or anything, and I had decided to visit Barbaresco and
Okay.
had a lovely time. And as you say, well, I mean, first of all, the thing to know is that, you know, in rural life, lots of people have the same surname. There are lots of Roccas, for example,
Right.
in
Like
Barbaresco.
Smiths.
Yeah, exactly. So I can vividly remember going to a village in the Prosecco Hills and saying, "Can you tell me how to get to X winery?" And the lady very kindly said back to me, "We're all called X in this village. You'll have to be a bit more specific." So anyway, went into the bar to ask how to get to this winery. Spoke to a guy standing at the bar, said to them, "How do I get to the winery Albino Rocca?" And he said, "Oh, it's fine. It's no distance at all from here. Just go down the road, turn left. You'll see the winery on your left, etc." So I think I must have stopped and had a cup of coffee or something. So I was obviously a bit early. So I then went to the winery at the appointed time and introduced myself, only to discover that the person I'd met in the bar was from the winery.
That's great.
So
That sounds.
I'd actually met a member of the Rocca family in the winery. Yeah, sorry, in the
Right.
bar, and then met him again.
Love it. It sounds like one of those rural films where the one guy is doing everything in the village. He's the winemaker, he's the postmaster, or whatever. That's great. And then you have another story related to Barbaresco while we're at it. Gaia, who's a famous Italian winemaker, and the Barbaresco Cooperative, from two generations of how impossible it was to keep up with the sheer physical energy and vitality of Angelo Gaia and his dad. What was that?
Yeah. So this was amazing. I since come to know the director of the cooperative, the Produttori del Barbaresco, it's called. Really great winery, and one that doesn't break the bank in quite the same way that Gaia does. But they are literally, I mean, Barbaresco is a tiny village, okay? And literally, the Gaia winery is about 100 yards from the Produttori. They are both on the main street in the village, okay? And there is a very strong connection between the two, which I only learnt about recently when I was doing the research for the book. So the Vacca family, who are the current one is Aldo Vacca, is the director of the Produttori, and his dad was also the director. So, and they both worked with the two generations of the Gaias. And I mean, Angelo Gaia is it was a most extraordinary. I've seen him in the States. He's in his 80s now. I've seen him at big events in the States recently. You know,
Right.
nothing is going to stop this guy.
No, he's an energy. Like even before I started writing about wine, we did a tour of Italy, and we went into Gaia, and he talked to our group, and he was just a dynamo. It's like, I can't believe you have the time and energy for a tourist bus. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no. So Aldo Vacca told me that his dad, as a younger man, had gone to the States with Angelo Gaia's dad and had really struggled to keep up with him. He would just, you know, every set of stairs there was, he would run up them.
Wow.
He would fit in, you know, a crazy number of appointments in the day. And although he was a younger man, he really struggled to keep up with him. And of course, Angelo Gaia also had this reputation that, you know, if a restaurant in Germany said, "Well, we'd like to try your wines," he would literally jump in the car, put the wines in the back of the car, drive up to Germany, show them in the restaurant, and then come back to Barbaresco. He was just, I mean, it is a major brand for a reason. The wines are very, very good.
Yes.
But the family have been absolutely tireless, amazing promoters of their wines. I can remember again years ago, going to a tasting in London and being totally charmed by Angelo Gaia. He is just so good at his job, both in terms of supervising the winery and in terms of promoting the wines. And then I've been there recently, and as you probably know, the next generation is now in day-to-day charge and runs the winery. So I said to, I think it was Gaia, his daughter, I said, well, it's a complicated business, isn't it, running a winery? And, you have these huge strategic decisions to make. And, who in the end makes decisions about it? And she just laughed and said, of course, my dad.
He's still in there.
He's still in there. So, yeah, they are a remarkable family. Yeah.
Absolutely. Remind me a bit of the Antinoris as well, but they're, of course, in Tuscany.
Yeah.
And was there a time when you were made to wait an hour outside a winery, which had been booked without any explanation, something like along that lines? Yes.
Yeah. So again, funny, all these stories happen to be in Barbaresco. Strange things do happen in other places, let me assure you. But yes, of course, writing the book was quite a, you have to be very disciplined. I had to visit at least 4 wineries a day. So you had to, keep to time. You knew exactly that you were going to be somewhere at 9 o'clock, somewhere else at 11 o'clock. Then, of course, Italians love lunch, as I do, so that's good. And then you'd fit in two winery visits in the afternoon, and you'd finish and you'd get back to your hotel at 7 o'clock or something. So they're long and fascinating days. So I think this must have been an 11 o'clock appointment. And we turned up at this Giuseppe Cortese. I'm not going to tell you who the wine person was, but I will tell you which the winery was. So Giuseppe Cortese, very important Barbaresco producer, and rang the doorbell at exactly the right moment. And the guy came out and said, "It's really nice to see you. Could you just wait outside for a bit because we're not quite ready?" So I said, "Yeah, of course, no problem." So Janet was with me, so we went and stood out on it wasn't a huge hardship. It was a beautiful, I think it was like an early autumn day, looking out across the vineyards of Barbaresco. It's gorgeous. And then, 10 minutes passed and quarter of an hour passed, and we began to think this is a bit strange. And then half an hour passed.
Wow.
And then in the end, an hour passed. And then somebody scooted out. I didn't see who it was because the guy from the winery said to me, "Did you recognize who that was?" And I said, "No, I didn't. I didn't really see his face." And he said, "Oh, it's X." I said, "Oh, okay, I understand."
It was a wine critic?
It was a wine critic, very important wine critic. And of course, important wine critics are really important to this business, really important. So I totally understood that. And apparently he had been late. So the whole thing, and of course that happens. Somebody else forgets you've got an appointment. They turn up half an hour late, blah, 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 etc., etc. So, this happens in a full life, and it keeps us humble. It reminds us that we're not the most important person in the world.
There's always a bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish. And, we had a perfectly good tasting, and we just had slightly less time for lunch.
Oh, well, the hardships, I tell you, the suffering.
I know. Yeah.
Let's get on to some of the sparkling wines because they don't get nearly enough focus. But Moscato d'Asti, which I think of as a floral, lightly effervescent sparkling wine, often just has about 5.5% alcohol, is also part of Piemonte. Why has it been traditionally overshadowed or undervalued, I think, compared to the Barolos and Barbarescos?
I think that's a really interesting question because I think first of all, I think it's an absolutely delightful wine. I think it's beautifully aromatic. Somehow the sweetness works with it. They are pretty much always sweet. And as you say, Moscato d'Asti in particular is low fizz, so it's not particularly aggressive on the fizz front. And if you want something to go with a nice slice of cake or a fruity dessert, perfect. And low alcohol.
Yes.
We often can't drink. We don't drink as much sweet wine as we used to because so often we're driving, and you need to worry about you probably need to worry about your alcohol intake, and therefore a glass of Moscato can be exactly the right thing at an end of a meal.
Sure.
Why is it? Why? I think there are two problems. I think one is that people disregard it because it's not made in the traditional method, i.e. in a bottle, like champagne is made. So people tend to compare it with champagne or champagne lookalikes and say, oh, well, those are the important wines. And the tank method, which is how you make Moscato d'Asti, is inferior. Now, I would disagree with that, because actually I think it is, to use probably another English expression, it's horses for courses. Okay?
Okay.
So if you have a fully aromatic grape variety like Moscato, and you want to express that in the glass, then the tank method is absolutely ideal. It is the perfect way of making wine, because you don't lose any of those fruit aromas, the floral and fruit aromas. So I think the tank method is ideal. It's not like champagne. It's not as complex as champagne, I would grant you that. It's just different.
Okay.
So I think that's one big problem. The other one is simply that it's not a wine that you keep and age for 20 years. So it's not an investor wine.
So it can't be serious or good.
It can't, because it's
by implication.
The implication is that it can't be serious or good, which I think is ridiculous. You know, because we need wine, so many different wines for different things, that we can enjoy wines for so many different reasons. And, you know, a lot of people, to be honest, a lot of people who are not, you know, deeply into this wine game would find Barolo quite a challenge to start with. They would just think this is truly weird. What are these flavors? You know, why is this wine so acidic? Why is it so tannic? Whereas you give somebody a glass of Moscato, they'll absolutely love it. Yeah. A few years ago at the WSET, where I work, I put on a sort of technical session about Asti and Moscato d'Asti. And I put out a general invitation to the company to say, you know, anybody can come along. You don't have to be, you know, a wine specialist or whatever. And I thought like 10 people would turn up. In fact, 25 people turned up.
Wow.
Which was amazing. And all sorts of people who just love Asti and are not wine geeks. So that's really interesting, that it obviously appeals to a range of people. And I think people can be overly snobbish about Moscato d'Asti. Yeah.
People could be terribly snobbish about a lot of things in wine, but how would you compare Moscato d'Asti to Prosecco, both in the method in which it's made and then the final taste profile?
Yeah. So the second one is easy. The second point is easier than the first. So the taste profile is very different, because Prosecco is normally semi-aromatic. It's not fully aromatic in the way that Moscato is. Moscato should jump out of the glass at you. The aromas should really be such freshness and really assertive, in a way that Prosecco is very pleasant. I like Prosecco as well. I'm not dissing Prosecco, but it's not as fully aromatic as Moscato. It's the technical point, and I will try not to bore you on this. The technical point is that Prosecco is made in a two-stage process. So you make a dry wine first, and then you add sugar, put it back into a tank, and get the bubbles by doing that.
Sure.
Asti and Moscato d'Asti are made only from the sugar that is already in the grape.
The grapes, okay.
Okay? So you never get to the dry stage. You interrupt the fermentation at exactly the right pressure point, sugar, and alcohol for the wine that you desire. So it's sort of like an interrupted fermentation. It's technically a bit more demanding, though once people have learned to do it, they can do it. You know, because we have plenty of chemistry, we can measure pressure, we can measure sugar, all those things easy. They can do the maths, but they are very similar. They're both made in a tank, but one is made by interrupting the fermentation. And as I say, all the sugar, all the sweetness in Moscato came from the original grapes.
The original grape, yes, and therefore Prosecco, because it's fermented to dryness first. Has double or more the alcohol, so it'll be 12, 13, well, probably not 13, but at least 12 and a half.
It'll be 11.5 to 12.
11.5, okay, right. So it's definitely higher. And then, of course, just on that continuum, champagne, and other traditionally made sparkling wines, that second fermentation to get the bubbles happens in the bottle. The dose or the sugar is added in the bottle, trapped there, and that's where you get the carbon dioxide as opposed to in the tank. Okay.
So to answer your other question, the original question about sparkling wine,
Yes.
The really exciting thing about Piemonte is that it has both styles. It has both tank method and traditional method.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
And you kindly said in the introduction that I wrote a chapter about the history of sparkling wine in Piemonte, and that was one of the biggest surprises, really, in doing the research, is that I discovered that, so people who know their Italian wine will know that traditional method sparkling wine, I made in the bottle, as you just explained, is typical of two areas, Franciacorta and Trento Doc. And those are the famous ones. Those are the ones that you will see in the Americas, that you will find in most restaurants in Italy. But Piemonte is actually the pioneer of that style. So long before Franciacorta and Trento Doc were created, a guy called Carlo Gancia, when he was 19, took himself off to Champagne, as one does, and learnt how to make traditional method sparkling wine in a bottle. And he came back and founded there's a large company called Gancia, which makes sparkling wine of various sorts in Piemonte. And of course he came back, and of course he had an immediate problem because he wanted to copy what he'd found in Champagne. But of course there was no Pinot Noir or Chardonnay in the vineyards of Piemonte. So he did some experiments and tried it with Moscato, and you can taste wines like that today. I don't think it's a really good use of Moscato for the reasons we've already explained. It's better to keep the aromatics rather than because whenever you do something in a winery, you might add something, but you often take something away.
Sure.
So if you make champagne, you will lose some of the fresh fruit because you have all those other interesting pastry, hazelnut notes, the tertiary notes, which come through age from within the bottle. So in about 1870, so he went to Champagne in around 1850. In 1870, he discovered that an aristocratic estate nearby was actually growing Pinot Noir. So he bought Pinot Noir from this aristocratic estate and made traditional method sparkling wine. Of course, he called it Italian Champagne, which of course you couldn't today. Sure. But he called it Italian Champagne. And that was about 1870. So this is way before Franciacorta, Trento Doc were founded and created traditional method in Italy. So, and then it sort of fell out of fashion, basically. And then after the Second World War, with the creation of inexpensive stainless steel and tanks and all that, we began to see the tank method. And Piemonte made a massive success of it with Moscato d'Asti and Asti, the two very similar sparkling wines made with the same grape variety, made in a tank. And so that became the dominant message. And then in 1990, these 6 large sparkling wine houses in Piemonte, all making tank method, said, hang on a minute, this traditional method is part of our heritage as well. So why don't we start a project to make traditional method sparkling wine? So they started a research project, and basically they planted different clones of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in various vineyards in Piemonte, and then they did micro-vinifications of those, and eventually by about 2002 they were ready to launch a wine which is called Alta Langa. So Langa is the name of the area around Barolo and Barbaresco. Okay. Alta Langa simply means the higher land, right, above those areas. So the wine is called Alta Langa, DOCG now, and it has to be 90% Pinot Noir or Chardonnay.
Huh.
So it has to be a Champagne lookalike, and it has to be made in a bottle. Second fermentation in the bottle, as you explained.
Okay.
So it's really interesting. It's been a significant success. They're up to 3 million bottles now in a relatively short time.
Yeah, that's not that long ago. Yeah. 2002.
No, it's not that. No, indeed. Yeah.
And are they the ones who have mandated for themselves to age the wine 30 months on the lees, on the spent yeast?
Yes.
In bottle?
So they made 2 really good decisions. One of which worked perfectly, which is that one, and the other one which was a good idea but didn't quite get it right. So let's start with that one. They
Okay.
said for Altalanga, the grapes have to be grown at a minimum altitude level. So they then had a big debate about what the minimum altitude level was going to be.
Sure.
And unfortunately, they decided on 250 meters when it should have been more like 400
Above sea level. Okay. To
above sea
get it
level
colder. Okay.
to get it cooler. Exactly. That's right. Because you're growing Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in a pretty warm place. Okay.
Right.
So you need altitude
Yeah.
to bring those
Get the
temperatures
acidity.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and apparently the reason another grower has told me this, I can't verify it, but it sounds entirely plausible, that there was one of the large companies already had vineyards at that lower level.
Ah.
So they compromised and included them, 250 and above.
Okay.
What's happened since then is that people have been planting higher and higher. So they're planting at 450, 500, 550, 600 meters, because obviously the climate has also warmed in the intervening decades.
Right.
So there's been lots of really interesting planting going on at 600 meters, which I think is really promising for the future. So that was the thing which they had the right intention, but didn't quite get the actual figure right.
Right.
And as I've already said earlier on, these rules never get changed. It's very difficult to undo the past.
Right.
The thing they actually absolutely got right, which was extraordinarily courageous, was they said you have to keep it in the bottle for 30 months before you release it.
Wow.
Now,
Good.
if you compare that to Champagne, which is 15 months,
Right.
and many other sparkling wine regions would be 15 to 18 months. So that is a real commitment, because obviously
Financially,
you've got a lot of wine in the cellar which you can't sell yet, and that was a really great idea. Which means that what does that mean in practice? It means that in practice every bottle of Altalanga will have those hazelnut, pastry, toasty notes, which is typical of the style. And I think that was a great decision, and has really paid off.
Great. Oh, wow. And just before, I wanted to do one more sparkling wine, but back to Asti. Did it used to be called Asti Spumante and they got rid of the Spumante part?
Okay, so yes, basically. So now the rules say you can call it either Asti or Asti Spumante.
Oh, you can still use that.
You can still call it Asti Spumante if you want to. Most of it is now called Asti. So there are now two very closely related wines, both made with Moscato, both made from the same region, called either Moscato d'Asti or Asti stroke Asti Spumante. Yeah.
Yes. Keep it simple, folks.
Keep it simple. Yeah, exactly.
Now, there's a red sparkling wine of the region. Let's tell us about that one.
So it's important to take a step back at this point and say that the old Piedmontese tradition was that many wines would be semi-sparkling.
Okay.
And that could be Barbera, could be Fraser, could be almost any red grape variety except Nebbiolo. Okay. But then there are also very aromatic grapes like Bracchetto or Malvasia, which make really good sparkling wine, but they are red. So Bracchetto is probably the most famous of the. I mean, none of these wines are well known. Let's be straightforward about this, but they are lovely. So Bracchetto is like, if you imagine what a red Moscato d'Asti would taste like, it's just like that. Okay. So it's floral. It's very red cherry. It's usually semi-sparkling. It's usually got residual sugar, and it's usually relatively low alcohol, probably more like 7 or 8% rather than 5.5. But lower than a typical table wine. So there is a real tradition of semi-sparkling, or there's even a category called vivace, which means very lightly sparkling. So
because then there's frizzante too, I guess.
Well,
is
frizzante,
that
like Asti is frizzante? Frizzante simply means less than 2.5 bar of pressure. So it is the bottom half of the pressure range. So frizzante is 2.5 or less. Spumante is 3 or more, but is much more typically 5 or 6.
Okay.
So you end up basically with something that is semi-sparkling or fully sparkling.
And then what would champagne be for comparison?
Champagne would be Spumante. If it was Italian, it would be Spumante. Yeah, it's the same.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
6 bar.
Same. 6 bars.
Bar.
Oh, for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Fully sparkling. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So they love sparkling wine. They love champagne. I mean, don't tell anybody. If you go to a high-end wine shop in Alba, which is the main town between Barolo and Barbaresco, it'll be two-thirds wines from the region and one-third champagne. It's quite
Oh, wow.
incredible how much they love champagne, and therefore that's partly why Alta Lang has been such a success, because they're saying actually we can make a wine which is broadly similar to your wine. Obviously, it's a bit riper. It's a warmer place, but it is in the same tradition as champagne. Yep.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And this red sparkling wine, would you compare it at all to the sparkling Shiraz from Australia? Or are they very different?
They tend to be quite different.
Right.
And that's because with sparkling Shiraz, basically you make a standard sparkling still wine first and then make it sparkling. So you end up with a much higher level of alcohol than you would in Vivace, Barbera, or whatever. Yeah.
Probably deeper red fruit, whereas, as you're saying, the red sparkling from Piemonte is more like a red version of Moscato d'Asti with lighter red fruit. Yeah. Okay.
Lighter red fruit. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
All right. And the whites, they must, I mean, we're talking about them after the reds and the sparklings. What percentage of wine made in Piemonte is white?
So this is a really interesting story, and actually one I've only researched since I wrote the book.
Okay.
So when there is another edition or whatever,
All right.
I will be able to add some things. So what I've discovered is that there's a significant trend of increasing the amount of white wine that is made.
Really?
And it's particularly Arnais in Roero, and Chardonnay, Sauvignon, and then a local grape variety called Timorasso, and of course Cortese, which makes Gavi. So Gavi is a well-established wine, but it has increased its plantings in the last 15 years. So it's quite a complex picture in that basically what's happening is that the Piedmontese are making less inexpensive wine. So there's much less cheap Barbera, for example, on the market, and that's simply because social habits have changed. Italians no longer go and work in the fields, most of them. Most Italians will have either a professional job or a job as a mechanic or whatever, and they will drink wine quite regularly as an option. They might drink some other drink, but they might drink wine. Whereas in the past, wine was simply a food substance, like grain or whatever.
Drinking it instead of water, like all day long or whatever.
So there was a huge amount of really inexpensive red wine grown in Piemonte in the past. Frankly, none of which is missed. Let's be honest, it was not great. So a lot of those figures have dropped. But interestingly, they've continued to drop in modern times. So there's been about a 15% reduction in black grapes grown by hectares planted. Acres planted in the last 15 years, and about the same increase in white grapes. So that's really interesting, and it's partly because people are drinking more white wine. That's a global trend, not just a Piedmontese one.
Sure.
And I think it's also because they have a very, very good market for their red grapes, for their red wines, but they also want to offer something else, and therefore they're looking for interesting local white grape varieties to complement the red wines which they already offer. So that's really interesting, and I only discovered this about a year ago. I eventually found the source of the data, which tells you exactly what is planted
What's
where.
happening. Right.
And you can see there's 15 years of data, and you can see exactly what's happening. Yep.
So you've already lined up your next edition or changes, updates to it. Yes.
Yep.
So you have a wine there with you. Speaking of all this, probably should have asked for it at the beginning so you could not have to wait so long, David. What is the wine that you have there with you?
So it is somewhat predictably red. I could have chosen a white wine, but I just happened to choose a red.
Sure.
And I chose it for why did I choose this? It is Nebbiolo.
Okay.
So that was a bit unadventurous because I could have.
Oh, well,
but I thought
you're on brand.
It's quite difficult because there's so many other interesting red wines, but they're much
Sure.
more difficult to find. So if
Sure.
I recommend Ruquet or Grignolino or something to you, you'll really struggle to find it Whereas
Right.
Nebbiolo you will find in any market in the
Yeah.
world.
Okay.
So this is a Nebbiolo, but not from a typical place, or at least
Ah,
not from a well-known place.
okay. Something
So,
tricky.
I've already said, Alba is the center of the wine trade in
Yeah.
Piemonte.
Okay.
And as I've already said, Barolo is 20 minutes in one direction, Barbaresco is 20 minutes in another direction. And then there is a region called Roero, which is 20 minutes north of Alba,
Okay.
which incidentally, why Alba is such a good place if you're a wine tourist, because you are between three really important denominations.
Huh.
So Roero is well known for its white wine. It's where Arnais. So Roero Arnais is a pretty well known wine, which particularly since about 1990 has done really well in the world, and as I've already said, has increased its plantings even in the last 15 years. What people don't know about Roero is it's also a very good source of Nebbiolo wines at much lower prices.
Ah.
Okay, so this is about because obviously Barolo and Barbaresco have become, quite expensive wine. I mean, some
They're
of them are
brand
super.
names. Yeah.
Some of them are super
Luxury.
expensive, and then below that there's a great band of fantastic wines, which if you put it in, sorry, I'm going to do this in pounds, like 35 to 50 pounds a bottle.
Okay. So double that for Canadian dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's some fantastic wines from Barolo and Barbaresco in that price range. You don't have to pay 250 to
Okay.
get a great wine. However, if you go to Roero, you are going to be right at the bottom of that band. So you're going to get a really great wine at a really good price.
Okay.
Now, my friends in Roero always get cross at this point, and I have had this argument with them, and I know exactly what they did and why they did it. Sadly, I just think they made a mistake.
Okay.
So if you look at the bottle, and I will show you the bottle. So don't worry about the vineyard name and all that at the moment. So underneath it says Roero DOCG, doesn't it? Can you
Yes.
see the Roero in white? Yeah.
Barely. Yes. Yes.
Barely. Yes, okay, I'll put it
Yeah.
a bit
Oh,
closer.
that's fine. Yeah.
Is that better?
Okay.
So Roero. Now, if you went into a wine shop and saw Roero like that, you would, unless you are a Piedmontese wine geek, you would have no idea what was in that bottle.
You wouldn't know the grape.
Okay?
Yeah.
You would not know the grape.
True.
And their argument is, well, we want to be like Barolo and Barbaresco. We want to be known for our place.
Right.
And I'm saying to them, fine, except you have to understand that nobody's going to know. And the weird thing is, they did call their white wine Roero Arnais.
Ah.
So you can tell exactly what the grape variety is from the front label. So, sadly,
No logic again.
I just think it was heart over mind. Just didn't think that one through. So
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, they didn't put it, but that's fine. Anyway, what it means is that there are real bargains to be had in Roero from the Nebbiolo grape variety. The style is slightly different because Roero has got lots of sand. It has far more sand in the soil than Barolo or Barbaresco. So you don't get quite the enormous body that you get in Barolo wines.
Okay.
Which actually might be a good thing. They're more accessible. This is a reserva and probably comes from a relatively clayey site. So actually it's quite similar. But it's a beautiful wine. And just to prove that it does age, this is 2014 in the glass.
Ah.
Okay.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Beautiful deep color still.
It is. Very much.
It's got all those things I was waxing lyrical about earlier in terms of what it smells like. So it's got those floral notes. It's got that lovely ripe red to slightly black fruit. It's got some of that tarry, earthy complexity of aged Nebbiolo.
Right.
So I think it's a gorgeous wine, and yeah, good value. And it's just worth knowing the name of Roero to know that you can get very good Nebbiolo from that place.
Well, we'll put that in the show links as well.
Yeah. Good.
David, the time has flown. Let me wrap up. This has been fascinating. I've found this a great, almost like a compact course on Piemonte. So it's wonderful. If you could share a bottle of wine with anyone outside the wine industry, living or dead, who would that be? And what would the wine be that you'd open?
So I said to my wife before she went out this evening, I said to her, I don't know the answer to this, and she's bound to ask me. And then I said, And I wasn't joking. I said, of course, I'd share it with you. I said to my
Ah,
wife, and she went, oh. And then she said, yeah, but you can't say that. So I said, okay, I'll think again. So I said, actually, I'd like to share. This is a slightly odd choice because this person is very much alive, and he is an English wine writer.
oh,
But he does live in France, so I don't see him hardly ever. So Andrew Jefford is
yes, marvelous wine writer.
Marvelous wine writer. And why would I want to share this bottle of wine with him, whatever it turned out to be? Because I just think he has an amazing facility with words, which most of us, I just do not have. Some of my colleagues at the WSET get cross with him because he uses a lot of quite sort of, he uses a lot of analogies. He uses a lot of he's quite a poet. He does actually write some poetry as a lot of like a hobby. But I just think I think we struggle in wine. I struggle and we struggle in wine to actually convey this amazing experience. And I think Andrew does it better than anybody. So that would be the reason why I would share the wine. What would the wine be? I would choose something a little bit more off-piste, like one of the great white grapes of Piemonte, which actually has begun to be known a bit better. It's called Timorasso, and it doesn't come from anywhere near Barolo or Barbaresco. It comes from an hour and a half away towards the east, towards the border with Lombardy. And it's one of those amazing white grapes. It's very full-bodied. It's very neutral when it's young. So you really have to put it away for 5 to 10 years. And then it develops into a sort of version of Riesling. You know, those amazing hydrocarbon, you know, the petrol, the diesel notes, all those things. And so it develops real complexity and interest with a bit of bottle age. And I'd just love to know what he would make of it and how he would describe it.
That would be fascinating to hear him talk about that, or any other wine. As we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to mention, David?
I think, let's just talk about wine tourism for a moment.
Sure,
because we haven't talked about that, have we?
Yes.
So yes, Alba and Barolo and Barbaresco have become real wine tourist destinations, absolutely properly, because they are, I mean, it's a beautiful landscape, amazing wines, incredible cuisine. What are you waiting for? You know, I mean, it's just, you know, they are fantastic places to visit. And it's become very smart of late. You can see that it's been very successful. So there's lots of lovely little, you know, Michelin-starred restaurants. There are lovely small. There aren't big hotels, but there are lots of lovely boutique places to stay. There are inexpensive places to stay. The food and wine scene is never going to be cheap, you know, because it's super high quality, but it is really worth it. The one bit of advice I would have is, if you have any more time, do go somewhere else in Piemonte as well, because it is so easy just to stay in the Langhe, in Alba, and not go anywhere else, and not taste, you know, the great Barbera wines, which are only like 50 minutes away, or that white Colli Tortonese Timorasso, which I just talked about, which is an hour and a half away, or even the Nebbiolo wines of northern Piemonte, which are 2 hours away. So my bit of advice would be, of course, go to Alba, have a great time, but do schedule a couple of days to go somewhere else as well.
Lovely.
And of course, you'd have the perfect guide to all that in here.
Yes, the Wines of Piedmont. Congratulations again on this book, David, and how much it's been lauded to in the press and the awards. And just a reminder that 2 of you can win a copy of this book, but the rest of you should all go and get it from Académie de Vin. We'll put the link to academydevin.com and to David's books. You're at winefriend.org, Winefriends?
Yes, so that's my personal website.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Is there anywhere else we can find you online, or is that the primary? Are those the primary two?
Place. I'm on Instagram simply as David Way Wine.
Okay.
For example, I'm on Facebook. But yeah, the principal place is winefriend.org. Yep.
Winefriend.org. Great. Yep. And Académie de Vin. Well, David, thank you so much. Real pleasure talking to you. Again, this has been a marvelous education in Piemonte. I want to go, and I'm thirsty now. I want to actually go down to my cellar and see dig out a Barolo or something, see how it's doing. But thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I feel it's such a privilege to have written about such a great region and to have learned so much in the process. And I love sharing it with people. So thank you, Natalie. It's been a real pleasure.
Your passion is evident. So don't log off, David, but I'll say goodbye for now and look forward to sharing a glass with you in person sometime.
Indeed.
Okay.